So all through the day, we've been learning about aspects of entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship and how that might affect our ability to do innovative work within the public service. And so we started off this morning thinking about ecosystems and ecologies of support, the porosity of entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship in and out of organisations. Depending on which session you went, you either thought about how to translate theory into practice, or you thought about looking at different practices and then starting to think about what lessons you've learned. And then over the last session, you've experienced either a masterclass or you've heard about Splash Adelaide and looked at some successes and failures and personal learnings to get a little bit more in depth into how do people do this work? How is it that we do entrepreneurship within the public service? And I guess one of the key things that's important around acting innovatively is being able to take a leadership role regardless of the level of organisation that you are, or regardless of the role that you've got in a particular project, or regardless of where you're sitting in a department within a broader public service. And so our last session is really starting to delve in a little bit more into the role of leadership and into a little bit more into how we lead no matter where we are in an organisation or on a project. So I'm thrilled to announce our guest speaker, Dr. Fiona Kerr. Fiona combines a half-time academic role with the Adelaide University as their systems and neural complexity specialist, and the other half with public speaking and consulting on a range of cognitive neuroscience areas and neuroethics. So I don't know how many of you have heard, but for this year's TEDx Adelaide, Fiona has been announced as the first official speaker. She was just telling me about the 3 different topics, and I want to hear all 3. So, and she also featured recently on Catalyst talking about being superhuman. And so there's a lot of really interesting research and information that Fiona is doing. Her areas include building the new brain, the neuropsychological impact of human interaction, as well as humans and technology. And she also advises companies on how leaders can build better brains and craft organisations, and spent time with a range of organisations, including ones like Cirque du Soleil. So it's a tremendous pleasure to introduce you to Fiona. Please welcome her with me.
Good afternoon. Okay, what I want to do today is talk to you about the entrepreneurial brain. So what is an entrepreneur? What does that mean for the way that you think? And then also, what does that mean for what we craft in terms of organisations? Because there's no doubting, I was talking yesterday at Vivid about is data killing creativity? And we were talking about whether or not creative brains are different than non-creative ones. And yes, in some ways they are. It's a different discussion. But what you can do is increase the capacity for people to be entrepreneurial and to have that capability to be able to do a number of things that I guess non-entrepreneurial people don't do. So without further ado, I'll start. One of the things that I want to do is get some clarity. I wasn't here this morning, I'm sorry. So if this has been repeated in any way, around what's meant by entrepreneurs. So for me, some of the really important things around entrepreneurship, it's really hard to say, isn't it? I'm used to saying entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship. It's things like the dreamers who do type of way of thinking about things. And I think Koch, it talks about the secret weapon. So it is very much a case of people being quite proactive in organisations. What's very relevant to, I think, everyone in the room is that what you tend to do is an entrepreneur is someone that can take hands-on responsibility and does. Very often, people in government are spoken of in terms of, well, they go and they have an easy job. I haven't actually found that, both being in government and working with it. I think an awful lot of people who work inside large institutions, and academia is no different, they're there because they really want to make a difference. And quite often it's harder in large institutions with a bit of inertia than it is in smaller, more nimble organisations. And yet you still get people, the entrepreneurs, who are the people who can, move and shake and do things. So they stay within a business, and there's a couple of things I just want to talk about that you might have read quite often. So one of the things is that quite a few things you'll read say that all entrepreneurs are extroverts. No, you can get quite introverted entrepreneurs. So that's not an obvious thing. But one of the things that is really critical is all of them do very much like that kind of intellectual stimulation. They like things that are challenging. And one of the reasons is because they have curious brains. So they like to try and do something different in an organisation. They're quite individual, and the other aspect is around what's called power distance. So one of the interesting things about entrepreneurs, and we'll talk about it through the process, is they don't tend to be hierarchical in the normal sense. So I must admit, I got into trouble a few times in government because I tended to just say, but that would be great. And off I went. And it would be, no, you haven't gone through this kind of, but we just need to do that. So very much an entrepreneur will go towards what they want to do and what they want to shape, or the problem that they see. And what we need is more flexibility around the capacity to move mobilely across organisations. And I'll talk about that. So, what do they do? One of the things that they do is they act very proactively, as I've just talked about. They're very good at seeing an opportunity and trying to figure out how to make that work in the organisation that they're in, because they do look at the organisation. So a fascinating thing about an entrepreneur as opposed to an entrepreneur is that they definitely have the goals of the organisation at heart, and that's what they aim at. So what that means with entrepreneurs, and every entrepreneur I've known that is good and successful and still sane, is their values and their goals are very much aligned with the part of the government or the organisation that they're in. Because entrepreneurship, because it's so driven by the fact that you have to believe in what that organisation is doing, it's very difficult if you've got a clash. That tends to make entrepreneurs move more than the hamstrung feeling around being able to do, projects or things. Another thing is, of course, they think outside the square, but they're also extremely good at getting people to work together. And there we have one of the differences that you talked about, just up here, between the management and the leadership. So one of the really interesting things about entrepreneurs is they can be at just about any level. And it would be really nice if we were more able to have almost that double-rung ladder of being able to have a look at, okay, so we've got the regular management process, which is a very legitimate process. Managers are, critical to structures. But we also need a method of being able to look at entrepreneurs, to being able to recognise them and use them, that sit at this, in the same place as the management rung. Some, very few organisations have double-rung ladders for things like that. Not very many here, and it's a really interesting structure to set up. So entrepreneurship, one of the things that is very valued is the creative side. And no, I don't actually think it's strict left-right brain, but definitely creativity is one of the things around being an entrepreneur. The second thing is they're really good at stepping in and out of being an employee. So you can be a leader, and at the same time you can be an employee, or you can be one and then go back to being another. You can shuffle around quite comfortably. And a good entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, is really good at doing that. They don't hold one place or the other. And another aspect is they are very good at getting people to feel comfortable with fast decision-making. Now, there's one of the key rubs we have with a lot of large organisations. Certainly I can now talk about, that I work half-time for the uni, and oh my goodness, it's just the same. It's really difficult, quite a few times, to make quick, nimble decisions in the process, because you just have to get through so much. And it's exactly the same in any large institution. So what we normally reward, if you like, is that, a manager is supposed to settle things. They're supposed to keep order, they're supposed to keep people comfortable, which is the opposite of what you actually should be doing as a manager. You should be shoving them around and putting them into discomfort so that they think about changing and doing things, in another way. And entrepreneurs naturally do that, so that's one of the reasons that sometimes they get into trouble. You're laughing. Have you got into trouble? Okay, we talked about the entrepreneurial brain. So how do you build new brain? So now I get to talk a little bit about that, because that's my favourite subject. So building brand new brain is neurogenesis. Neuroplasticity is taking the brain you've got and doing something different with it. But we can all build brand new brain all our lives. So that's a really good thought. It's true. So individually, just for a couple of minutes, how do you do it? How do you do that outside work, just as an individual person, from a baby right through to sort of 90 or above. One of the things then, you do 3 or 4 things in order to be able to build a new brain. One of them is you exercise. And yes, we've talked about the normal oxygen and glucose and those sorts of things that your brain actually needs to make decisions. But one of the things that happens when you move enough to oxygenate is you get something called BDNF. It's a very long word otherwise. And that is a fertilizer for your brain. What happens is your neurons can replicate with BDNF. You can build brand new neurons, new dendrites, so you can build new neural matter with BDNF. Another thing that it does is it allows your memory to work more efficiently. So the way that you take information in is quite complex, and we take bits and pieces in, we fractionate it across the brain, and the brain decides whether to keep bits or let it go. Neurons will reset within 10 seconds the first time if they're not, if they're bored. And so then you go on to sort of 2 minutes, a holding pattern, your short-term memory, your mid-term memory, you go into sleep, you go into those sorts of things. So memory gets more efficient. You can pick up more information, you can maintain more information to be able to transfer to longer-term memory parts of your brain. Novelty. When you learn new things, if you think about it, whenever we do what we're doing, everyone's brain's different because we shape it by what we do. So our experience gives us the brain we've got. And we prune it all the time, and we grow it all the time. So yes, we've got sort of around 7 billion neurons, but they're different ones as we go along through life. And so when you learn something new, you have to kind of have new real estate to be able to put that new information in. So you're actually growing a new part of your brain. And if you're excited and interested and proactive and those sorts of things, then that happens a lot more. So another part of growing new brain is sleep. I don't know if anyone saw The Insight lately or another couple of talks on just how valid sleep is and just how critical it is to storing information but also to growing new brain. So really easily put for a couple of seconds, the first few hours, who gets more than 6 hours sleep? Yes, good. Oh, you almost be brilliant. The first few hours, what your brain does is it maintains. So it cleans, it's got glial cells that clean off plaque, it does all those sorts of things. It's really critical to us maintaining a healthy brain. But then, probably in about the 6th hour, it depends on how long your cycle is, between an hour and a half and 2 hours each cycle, then what it does is called pre-REM 2, and it takes the information and it files it. So that's when it starts to say, right, what are all the experiences you've had during the day? What have you learnt? Now I'm going to put it into the areas that it fits. And once it's filed, around probably sort of 6.5, 7 hours, then it starts to play. So think of it as work and play. So now it can take things back out of those files and it can cross-reference and it can put things together that weren't together before. And one of the main reasons, that's REM, one of the main reasons that it can do that in REM is because the front of your brain, which is the frontal cortex is like the logic policeman, no, you can't walk through a wall and no, you can't fly, that powers down in REM. So that's why you can do all these weird things in a dream that are impossible. It's also why you connect things that wouldn't normally be logically connected and you come up with creative, brand new ideas. So that when you wake up in the morning and think, that's what I'm going to do, that's REM. And that's a creative kind of new type of, cross-connection. So sleep is critical because in the late hours of sleep, epigenetically we change. So what happens is we start to get different types of neuronal activity, which is very much based towards memory and plasticity. And we are able then to build new parts of the brain. So that's one of the ways that you do. So don't skimp on sleep. Naps are also important. We are biphasic as an animal. And what that means is we're actually built for 2 sleeps. Does anyone have nano naps at home on the weekend? Yes. At work. Does anyone sleep at work? Have a nap at work? Now see, everyone laughs. I work in different countries, and I tell you, the countries where they still have the siesta, they are so much better in the afternoon at doing difficult work. And it's really quite important. We have a homeostatic curve and we have a circadian rhythm. And they kind of fight with each other until about they align in the middle of the day. Sort of 12 to 2, the normal time in the middle of the day. So we are supposed to have a nap. So everyone here You have to say to whoever your boss is, nope, that's the most efficient way. When I'm napping, I'm working really hard. Because what my brain's doing, well, I'll tell you what your brain's doing. And in fact, it's a laugh, but it's not. It's actually quite important. A lot of creative organisations, and I've worked with a number of them, you have no choice. You know, Google, if you haven't had your afternoon nap, will come up and say, why not? So it's really interesting, the difference in the different organisations. What it does is it clears your inbox. Think about your working memory, which is the stuff that you take in all the time. I'm standing here, I'm balancing, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say next. That's real working memory. And it gets cluttered up over the morning. And no more gets in. So you actually have to clear it out. So I'll tell you the 3 different lengths of naps. Because it's quite I guess, scientifically differentiated. The shortest nap, and that kind of power nap thing, is between 10 and 25 minutes. Any less than 10, forget it. But you can just sit, close your eyes and breathe. It's better than doing absolutely nothing. But actually napping, up to half an hour, does a number of things around making you more alert, and the things listed, motor performance, you can refocus, and you normally lift your mood, you're not as grumpy. So as a quick kind of rest, as a shower for your brain, that is a really good thing to do every day. And there's lots of setups to be able to do it in different places. The thing I call the valley of death is the 30 to 60 minutes. So quite often when I say to people, do you nap? No, I don't like napping. I get a headache. You know, it's awful. I get fuzzy. And invariably, people have tried to nap between a half hour and an hour. And what happens is, remember I talked about the frontal lobe powering down to go into REM? Once you get over half an hour, your brain thinks you're going to go into a REM cycle. So it starts to power down the front of your brain. And if you wake up in between, it takes about 20 minutes to chug back up into being able to work. So you've got that horrible, heavy feeling, you know, that you just don't like it. So don't do the 30 to 60 minutes. What you either do is the 10 to 25, or you do the 60 to 90. So hour to an hour and a half is the creative sleep, because you go into a full REM cycle. And the work that's been done on this, and I've even done it myself. I actually had a government report to finish by the midnight on the 30th of June last year. And because the deadlines got pushed, so I ended up having like 6 weeks instead of 6 months to do some of the work, I had a really big amount of work still to go. And about 2 in the afternoon, I'm thinking, I'm never going to make this. I was down a rabbit hole. You know how you just get focused on minutiae because you've lost focus, because you get stressed and you can't do it anymore. So I had my 20 minutes, thinking, yep, that'll freshen me. I woke up and it didn't make any difference. And I thought, Fiona, you're going to have this hour and a half. You need something to shift you out of where you've got stuck. And I'm thinking, I haven't got the time. But I did it, and it was amazing. Because when I woke up again, it was, okay, I'm way off down here and I don't need to be. I've written that report last year and I could take that bit. This becomes really important. And it was all connecting it up. So I had a completely different view and I was more efficient. I was faster in the end. So some of the learnings that we've got are, if you have people that either have to learn, so it says a lot for education, they either have to learn something complex or have to deal with complex problems. If you take them into the place, you give them the sort of thing that they were going to have to do, like a complex problem, and then you let them sleep for an hour and a half. Then you give them another problem which is very similar, but a new one to that level. They will do much better. Not only will they do better than the first time, but if you bring them in, let them nap a little bit for 25 minutes, then give them the first problem, then an hour and a half, then give them another problem, they'll do better than they even did in the very beginning. So it's really interesting how it resets a number of things in your brain. So enough about naps, but yes, people laugh, but they are really important. They're really useful. The biggest thing, though, that grows our brain, and it's what I spent a lot of my time talking about, is human connections. We have an amazing capacity. We're hardwired to connect, and we have an amazing capacity to change each other when we do that. So for anyone who's done this before, just bear with me and do it again. So let's just do a 2-minute experiment. Here we are. We have a group that each one of you is now going to go into a new project. This is your project group. You're staring at them through a window. So this is the team that you're going to go into. What are the feelings you've got looking at this team? Just give me some words. Fun. What else? Understaffed. Well, isn't that an interesting thing to say? That says a lot about you. Diverse, yes. Energy, okay. I'm creative. So, would you like to go into that understaffed group? Yes. But that one's full, so you're going to have her as your boss. So, give me some words now. How are you feeling now? Scared. Yes. Challenged. Okay. Well, you could avoid her, and you could have him. So, words for him? Challenged again. Okay. So what we're very good at. If I let this run for a while, then I've had people do all sorts of amazing scenarios. They've sort of said, yeah, well, she might be an absolute sod to work for, but at least you might get something done, whereas he, and they can have these wonderful stories about who would be better and who would be worse and what they would do, what their basic moral values are. It's really interesting. It's a picture. But what we do is really quickly, we go to the sorts of things that we start to feel and that are foremost in our minds very often. So with the first picture, a lot of the things that people talk about, and you talked about some of them, are the kind of humour, the creativity. They look aligned, the kind of, moving in together, leaning in, all that kind of stuff. And it's one of the reasons why people like, I don't know who was listening to the new Yahoo person who now has taken her people back in. They have to come to work. They can't work at home. So why? What happens when we look at each other? The first thing that happens is we have mirror neurons that go off. So I'm sure that all of you have heard something about mirror neurons. But one of the fascinating things, so they tend to, I think about the 80s they were found, and there was some chimps who were being trained, for example, to drink from a cup. They were wired up. They stayed wired while their trainer then drank. And exactly the same neurons went off when they watched someone else. Taste, smell, touch, everything. Because they'd done it and they were now mirroring that from someone else. But the thing that fascinates me is that there is a subset of mirror neurons that only registers one expression immediately within 1/6 of a second of seeing another human being for the first time. So what do you think that expression would be? Smile. Yes, it is. And it's interesting for me that over the years, when we talk about this, what I used to get a lot was people saying the fight flight. First sixth of a second, you don't know them, you have to know if you need to leave. And much more now, people talk about smiles. And that's exactly what we're hardwired to do. When you've got a subset that is dedicated to one thing, what it means is it is really important for the species. So smiles and laughter. And if you are a good leader in your group, no matter what the level is, then that team, if we stick on the EEG caps in all of the team, that team, those neurons fire 3 times more than at any other time. So you make a big difference if you have that positive enthusiasm leading that team. Physically, you make a difference. The second thing that fires are spindle neurons. Spindle neurons are much faster, 1/20th of a second. They're called spindle because they're really long. So they go right from the beginning, right from the corpus callosum at the front, across the corpus callosum, right from the front part, and they join up a number of different areas of the brain. So they join up the kind of task bits with the empathy bits. And what they also do is they tend to combine trust and empathy, and they tend to grow it. Spindle neurons are in animals, including us, who have long-term complex social structures. So primates and elephants, and a number of other animals that have to be nuanced about knowing each other for a long, long time. So they're the ones with spindle neurons. And so that it's very often called the trust neuron. The third thing is oscillation. So it's about movement, and your brain's actually moving all the time. The little tiny neurons are constantly moving around. When you move with other people, even when it is that physical kind of leaning in from that first group, you get a number of things happening around inside your system. So if you're actually walking, who walks when they're needing to think about something? Yeah, does it help? Yeah, because what it's doing is that stuff we talked about before, the oxygen and the BDNF and all those sorts of things. When you're doing it with someone else, you also get a high level of dopamine because we love to move with each other. It's called dynamic resonance. It's why you rock a baby. It's why we really love to dance. It's why moving together, excuse me, is really, really enjoyable for human beings. So dynamic resonance is something that puts out a number of chemicals into your body. And some people even have walking meetings. And I don't know how many of you have, say, teenagers that you've had to talk about with something. A really good way to do it is to go for a walk. You're not actually looking at them. You're both moving and they talk. And partly that's because of exactly this. The dynamic resonance puts them into a different set of chemicals in their brain. And the sorts of things that then all of that leads to is face-to-face activation of a number of things. This is a scan, this little one down the bottom, which is a bit fuzzy, is a scan of someone telling a story to someone else, which is incredible. Thank you. Because what you're actually seeing is for us to tell a story, because it's one of the major ways people communicate and light the fire of someone else. If you can get them involved and engaged, we are storytellers, basically. And what we do is we try and break it up so that we give it to the other person in the way that it is going to entice them. So you're thinking very strongly about the other person when you're telling a story. Because if you've ever tried the experiment of telling something that's important to you and having the other person deliberately ignore you, it's really hard. Lots of people just can't do it. I can't do it. I stop. I've had people, when I've done that experiment, actually get the person's head, and turn them back around so that they try to look at them. So it's really important to us. So we get something called neural coupling. And it basically means that we start to lock eyes and we start to really get that kind of shared neural patterning in our heads. And if it's strong enough, we get something called retinal eye lock. So I'm just finishing a piece of work on, forgive me, the neurophysiological effect of touch and eye gaze on healing. Humans have incredible effects on other humans. That no technology has. So yes, I work with technology all the time, but I'm about to go to a medical technology conference and be the only one in the other corner saying, I think I've called it the rise of the robot nurse. Humans are the innovative disruption we seek. And it's because as soon as a human is under stress, it's called allostatic load, because of the chemicals in their body, they actually like another human being. And I'll tell you why. So if I pick on you, because I can, because I know you, so I'm your nurse, you come in for the first time. And the first thing I do is take your hand so that I can monitor your heartbeat, and I'm looking at you. So straight away, I've started the C fibres in your body, and which are mediated through emotion. So touch is incredibly important. And when I'm looking at you, I've started that whole, mirror spindle thing happening. So it means that we immediately have a physiological connection. And if I see you every now and then and I'm nice, then that trust process will increase. So you go and have your operation, you come back, and then you're going fine, but then either you're in pain or you're worried about something. When I come in and you see me, then when we look at each other, our retinas skip around until one of your retinas aligns with one of my retinas, the right hemisphere of your brain aligns with the right hemisphere of my brain, and I change the amygdala phase of your brain. I calm you down. Now, no technology can do that. It's why you can, if you looked at your child and calmed them down. If you look at a person, I was in industrial mediator for years, and I didn't pick that, it picked me. And I think it was because, small, I could, I really knew how important it was to get with the person, to look them in the eye, to tell them the truth, and to win them into a process of, are we both in this together? It's what happens when you do that. So retinal eye lock is really powerful. Human beings are amazingly connected when we are on the same page. And one of the good things about entrepreneurs is they are driven to do something positive. And we pick that up. We've got really good radar. If someone comes along and tries to con you, we know it. We're excellent at picking it up. And it's often because we can just, we're really good. So the results are things like trust, and yes, In fact, I've got my little picture just to prove that I know them. Gorgeous. So I had really interesting conversations with a lot of the people in CIRC about how they go about that process of being so comfortable with each other and of trusting, that the really hugely high level of trust in an organisation like that. Something, otherwise sometimes you die. So one of the things that I noticed all the time there, that was just an extreme, but I notice in all of the organisations that are good at this, is there's quite a high level of empathy and humour because people are comfortable. They feel safer. They also can absorb information, because if you've got that chemical cocktail that we've just talked about, you get your parasympathetic nervous system firing, you get all sorts of chemicals that go into your brain that allow that neurogenesis, that allow speed, then you're quite nimble and you also get quite creative. So that's why it's really critical in a lot of cases to have that interaction. Another thing is you tend to align values, because you can tell quite quickly when you work with someone very directly what drives them. And it really does help. So that collective identity becomes much more powerful in what you can do. And you contribute more because you feel safe. Even if you say something dumb, it's not a risk. So you really are more comfortable. The shared vision and goal alignment is very important, and we'll talk about that in a little while, because goal alignment is a challenge that we have quite often in government and in large institutions, because there are multiple goals across the organisation and it can make it quite difficult. Another thing is you're better at collaboration, because you will give someone else credit, you will give an idea and not, own it so that you can get the reward for it. Those sorts of things become really important. And the creativity aspect we've talked about, but something that's really important is the other side of it. If you're in an organisation, I don't know if anyone's been in an organisation where you just kept your head down. Absolutely, you just don't risk. Because one of the problems when you're in that situation is when you step outside the box at all and you know you're going to get shot, you get more and more cortisol. So you can get low-level cortisol or you can get constant cortisol. We have cortisol receptors that go off and they can become more and more irritable the longer you're in there. And that's quite often why you can get low-level, anxiety at work, and you can actually get problems. You've got two different types. One in your veins, it can affect your heart, it can affect different parts of you. But the fascinating thing about cortisol is all of those things we've just talked about, those wonderful capabilities of your brain to be able to bring information up and recombine it and play. Cortisol is like a blanket. So you can no longer get at anything which is sitting down in your memory. It's why really scared people do really dumb things, because they just can't get at any information. I'm not saying that people are scared there, but if you think about, people in situations when you're watching a movie, and you think, why did you do that? But when you're actually doing it, you don't think. You cannot get at it. Cortisol stops the capacity to be able to pull up information. So another thing that happens once you've got good connectivity in an organisation is people are better at that kind of adaptive pressure. And for entrepreneurs, that's really important. You are very often outliers. So to be able to wear that comfortably is important. So you might think that you feel like people are saying, what now? But as long as they're positively, supportively saying that, you will be able to keep doing it. And it's a big difference. Another thing is, it tends to sort out the linear versus the complex thinkers. So the reason I talk about that is, I'll talk about the difference. And someone pointed out that looked like a past political leader, and it wasn't supposed to. But what you've got in linear thinkers is you tend to have a person that, it's the hammer and the nail thing, If all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So they tend to simplify things because of the way that they think. They have high levels of biases that kind of shape the information that they take in, the information they see as relevant. And the more success they have and the more control they have, the stronger that is. So you can think on that for a minute. Is there someone, we probably all know a linear thinker. And a fascinating little piece of work took people who were very kind of, the linear versus the complex, very skilled and very unskilled. And this graph is kind of a is a why dumb people don't know they're dumb graph. And the outline is that linear thinkers only think of very specific information, which reinforces what they already know. So they don't tend to think out. They don't look for disconfirming information. And then that's the kind of person at the top who says, just give me good news. I mean, if all you give them is good news, the company's going to fall off a cliff. So what you need is people who can see the complexity, see the connections, see all of the different aspects. And one of the things that's interesting is, can we make linear thinkers into complex thinkers? And it's a little bit like the natural, nurtured, and never. There are natural complex thinkers that just see all of it almost as a map. There are most people who, the more you give them complex problems to solve, the better they get at it. We grow new neural schema when we're given those complex problems because they're unusual, they're interesting, they're novel. And then there's the never. There are those few, very, very few linear thinkers that just are not ever going to be able to do it. And in organisations that allow you to do more and to test yourself and to have those complex problems, most people will get better and better at doing it. So the organisations that have entrepreneurs that they support will just be more and more entrepreneurial. So how do we do that? What do we build? We build organisations that empower people in their normal work life, because very often the entrepreneur is not the top manager. So what does that look like? It sounds great, but specifically for entrepreneurs, one of the things is the kind of communication which is open. You really can get at information when you want it, the way you want it, from whom you need it. And part of that is being able to make an informed choice. So can you get what you need when you want it? And not huge amounts either, not the fire hose. Can you actually get relevant information? And it's really critical that you think about what's not flowing here. Very often, informal communication flows a lot better than formal communication. So organisations that are very supportive of entrepreneurship and creativity are very good at having central data systems that you can pull out information when you want it, rather than trying to push it all out, because people just drown and go delete, 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 and kind of stop looking. So it's really good having smart methods of centralised data and sporadic local data as well, not just centralised, that you can pull out when you want to. Resources. So if all you've got is a tiny bit, then all you can do is a tiny bit. So have you got the resources you require to do what you need to do? And very often, again, it's that think big, or it's that we'll give you a little bit and you have to answer these 20 things that you're going to do on it. So it's difficult if you're being creative or if you're going out on a limb, because often you don't know. It's an emergent process. And so those companies very often will say, okay, here's a sizable amount, go away, we'll actually leave you alone for that 6 months or a year. And it's amazing what people come back with. That doesn't mean that you give lots of money to everybody, but it means that you really think about how you tie up any resource that you give. Don't bound it so tightly that people cannot use it in a creative way. Ownership. It's amazing how much it dumbs down a situation when someone cannot become the owner of what they want to do, or cannot find the person who actually owns the process. One of the projects I was on, in a large part of the government, we needed to change a very large part of the process. So there was a number of stakeholders, and there was a number of large parts of the project that needed to be changed. So my first question was, okay, so who owns this bit? Who owns this bit? Who owns this bit? The first one, well, it's kind of spread across it. No, who owns it? There has to be a decision maker here. Who owns it? We took 6 months, because I would not move past that's shared between 3. No, it's not. Who owns it? And eventually, at board level of that process, they nutted out, they fought out who was going to take responsibility for each of those areas. And then we went forward really fast. So it's an interesting process, it's an interesting issue around ownership. Very often, large organisations, and especially bureaucracies and institutions, have a number of different goals. So you have to make sure that there's a clarity around who is going to own this bit and how can you get ownership of the part that you are responsible for. Reframe risk. One of the nice parts about being an entrepreneur is you're inside an organisation. So you've got people that, that are self-motivated, that have an internal locus of control, which is what that's meant to look at. So they are very keen to do things. They will be proactive. So make sure that they know where the boundary is, because it's quite critical. If you can't be creative when there's no boundary, you have to actually be doing something for a reason. So where are my edges? Because then I can really get on and do something fantastic in here. But if I actually don't know what my scope is, that's quite difficult. So make sure that you bound clearly enough so that people then have the freedom to be very creative. The positives about being an intrapreneur is that you're inside an organisation. So if it is supportive for entrepreneurship, it's quite low risk, the learning. And one of the things is you don't have the same risk of the entrepreneur who might fail, who might fold. So take full advantage of that. You've got this kind of, not cushioned, but you have got a supported layer there around entrepreneurship. We've talked about permission to act and personal responsibility. What that actually looks at is really easy. Do people have the facts they need? Do they have the resources? And do they have the permission to use them? The thing that then does is it starts to get the complex thinkers interested. It starts to get them engaged because they can actually do stuff. The structure. Whatever structure, you need a structure, but it needs to be able to allow people to move across parts of it. And the really good way to think about that is, can they move when they're curious? Can they move and find new ways to do something? For questions like that, they should be able to tap on who they need, wherever they are, which means they have to be able to find them. They have to know they're there, find them, and be allowed to talk to them or work with them. So are you set up like that? One of the interesting things very often I've seen in entrepreneurial organisations, and one of the things we started in a couple, was instead of trying to restructure all the time, what we got really good at was bringing people in who knew what they were doing. That is so invigorating, getting them in to talk to people instead of figuring out how to reorganise a department is much more efficient and much less confusing, and it's much more energising. So, bring in outside knowledge. Then you get your complex decision makers who see opportunities. And connectivity is really critical. So when do people use email? And when do they think about the difference between email, when they should pick a phone up, when they can look at someone on a screen, and when they actually look face to face? Because not enough people think about that, or they get it the wrong way around. Good news is by face to face, difficult things are by email. Wrong. You do it the other way. When you've got virtual people, they need different kinds of management. And one of the things to think about is, because of the way that creative ideation works, work out when you get people physically into the same space. They don't have to be there all the time. But once they're there, then what you get is almost a piece of you goes into my brain and a piece of me goes into your brain. Then we can talk much more creatively at a virtual level. So that connectivity at first, that physical meeting and staying and getting to know someone in the beginning is critical in any kind of management thing. Creative environments don't have to look all, wonderful. Mostly it's about, can you get to the information? It doesn't have to be the kind of, Google has these sorts of things or that. That's at a real organisation. They've got a ship set up so people feel really creative. Mostly it's, can people work well together? And that leads me really quickly for 2 minutes to space. I'm going to rip through this. The ideation process means that what we like is we need big and small spaces depending on which part of a creative idea we're in. So when we're in the first part, we love big open spaces to collect information. Then we go and huddle away with small groups. And our brain works in something called framing. Then we scaffold, we go into the sort of structuring again of the information that we've collected, and then we like to huddle again. We like to go in and really throw around the information that we've got and see what we are creating. So it's a technical process, and it means that you need big spaces and small spaces. So there's some things to think about. When you connect the small spaces, it can be formal or informal. Even in big spaces, what have you got that people can connect? And the thing that I see all over the world, probably the 6 countries I work in around creativity, is the lunchroom. It really is. Everywhere has got lunchrooms that are used by people when they get together, whether it's a tiny little startup or a big organisation. When you've got shared spaces, are they high or low tech? It's really good to have both. Are they hidden or visible? Again, it's useful to have both. Sometimes you need other people to be able to see you. Sometimes you need to huddle away on your own. Sharing ideas, how do you want to do it? Use both. The low tech, people think of low tech, as having to draw. When you use your arm, you're using a different part of your brain. Your motor neuron system kicks in completely different aspects of not only your creativity, but your memory processes, and your linearity versus your called abstraction. So it's why, don't ever give a 2-year-old an iPad. Make them work. And we're the same as adults. We use our arms and our hands. So you draw, and then you can also use high-tech. It's great. In the right, we could get to really wonderful things. But use them wisely, and again, do both. Reflection. So we've talked about that. This is how some people sleep. You get these wonderful soft diving helmets. Napping. That's the Google Pod. I've seen this. It looks amazing. It's kind of like the body snatchers. And this was another one that was really a really interesting, very low-cost example of people being able to go in and rest. You need to be able to move together, right? Spaces. One of the fascinating things is when you're working on a really tough job, if you have stress, we build up cortisol. If every 29 minutes you get up, and you, on your own or all together, you go hell for leather where you are, really, really, really run, you burn off your cortisol. You look like a twit, but you burn off your cortisol. But if everyone else is doing it, then you don't. Right, time. So the rest of them are very strong management, commitment and support, leadership, and it's about the values and the purpose. Yes, I've done work on leaders' brains being different. Creative leaders and people who are not creative, but people who are charismatic are actually have different brains, so they can create that neurogenesis. And the other thing is they're very good at strategic adaptation versus planning, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. So you need to be able to have people who are allowed to look, perceive threats, and then act when they see it. So then you've got an entrepreneurial process. So my summary is good quality open communication, a formal structure which allows mobility for the right reasons, reframing risk so that people can actually take that chance, adequate resources that aren't tied up with the wrong kinds of measures, opportunities for informed choice, permission to act and take personal responsibility, clarity of ownership and responsibility, so who actually can I go to here, who can make a decision, and strong management commitment and culture of scanning the environment. So the job spec for an entrepreneur is to be able to nap at work, to be able to move, so, it slides on every level, to be able to kind of move around the organisation differently, to get together and have fun, also to share ideas and to do novel things. Thank you.